Cycling is great for the body and the mind. Not only is it healthy and fun, but it can also sometimes be the quickest way to travel. When commuting to work in the city, cycling saved me many painful hours of sitting in a car or on a bus, itching along on clogged up roads. But one of the best things about cycling is that it's eco-friendly. Those who cycle regularly can take pride in doing their bit for the environment, at least in the travelling sense. I've had many a warm, smug glow whilst whizzing past lines of smelly, congested traffic on my way to work. But was my smugness entirely justified? Is cycling really as green as we think it is? Digging a little deeper, it may not be as black and white, or green, as we think. We're going to take a look at how environmentally friendly cycling actually is. Is cycling really green? Cycling as an activity, whether for commuting or leisure, is as green as it gets. Using pedal power emits virtually no harmful emissions or toxins into the environment. But the production of bicycles is a different story. And yes, this does have a carbon footprint. Although the manufacturer of a bicycle has a far lower carbon footprint than the manufacturer of a car, it is still an issue. Cycling as an industry has a long way to go before it can claim to be entirely green. Are bikes bad for the environment? If we focus on bikes as objects, their environmental impact is very low compared to cars. In fact, the manufacture of a small car emits approximately 55 times as many CO2 emissions as that of an average bicycle. However, the materials used for a bike, such as aluminium, steel, rubber and carbon, have a negative environmental impact in terms of how they're acquired, treated and transported. Many bike parts, including frames, are shipped or flown from overseas, using fossil fuels to do so. That said, once riding the bike, you're at least playing a part in offsetting the environmental impact of its manufacture. Studies have shown that even small increases in cycling trips substituted for car trips can have a huge impact on decreasing harmful emissions. Bicycle pollution. Aside from bike manufacture, cycling is a non-polluting mode of transport. It reduces air as well as noise pollution. In terms of old bikes, it is possible to recycle some bike parts. However, many of the estimated 15 million discarded bikes each year still end up in landfill. This is something of a tragedy, as it simply doesn't have to be the case. Recycling bike parts is often possible. There are numerous charities willing to take old bikes, even in poor condition. Many of these charities repair the bikes or use them for parts to help people in need. However, some bike parts and accessories, such as helmets, are difficult to recycle and end up as waste. This can be reduced if cyclists opt for eco-friendly options. These are becoming more widely available as manufacturers respond to the climate emergency. Polluting accessories such as bike cleaners, notoriously loaded with harmful organic solvents, can easily be replaced with effective eco-friendly cleaning products. Is cycling bad for the environment? As a form of transport, cycling is not bad for the environment. Certainly not when compared to motorised transport. Per kilometre, cycling has a carbon footprint of around 20 grams of CO2. This is less than a tenth of the emission produced by a car over the same distance. How is riding a bicycle environmentally friendly? Even if we consider the carbon footprint of a bike's life cycle, cycling is still an eco-friendly activity when compared to other ways of travelling. When riding a bike, we're not burning non-renewable fuels, we're not polluting the air or the environment, and we're easing congestion. Studies show that transport is now the biggest cause of pollution in the UK, with passenger cars being the largest contributor. Researchers suggested that if 10% of the population made more journeys by bike, emissions from cars would be reduced by about 4%. Why is cycling good for the environment? Cycling is clean and it's quiet. If you cycled alongside traffic in a city, you'll have experienced the pollution, the noise, the smell and the heat. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, global CO2 emissions dropped by 6.4%. Less car use and more bike use certainly contributed to this. Not that anyone would want another pandemic to dominate our lives, but I remember avidly following a friend's Facebook page as she posted daily photographs of her traffic-free cycle rides in London. In spite of everything else going on, she described them as joyful. It's food for thought. Clean cities dominated by 2 wheels instead of 4. Environmental benefits of cycling. As cycling increases, so does the demand for development of traffic-free spaces. More people cycling results in less concrete and more plants and wildlife in urban areas. Along with the reduction of harmful emissions, And when we talk about our environment and transport, we rarely consider animals. But ask yourself, when was the last time that you killed a pigeon or a rabbit whilst riding a bike? The answer probably is that you never have. Car versus bike emissions. To manufacture a car, on the other hand, is responsible for roughly 65 grams of CO2 emissions per mile driven. Adding to these emissions while driving takes it up on average to around 280 grams per mile. In contrast, the carbon footprint of cycling per mile from manufacture and use is around 33 grams of CO2. The carbon footprint of cycling isn't all from the manufacturing process alone. It's also measured in how we fuel cycling, and therefore the food that we eat. What we eat and where it comes from has a huge impact on how many grams of CO2 we emit daily. For example, if your cycling is powered by locally grown vegetables, your human CO2 emissions will be considerably less than if powered by cheeseburgers. Some might argue that cycling is active and therefore we eat more to fuel it, but unless you're absolutely canning it on an epic daily commute or training schedule, this will not be the case for most people. Does riding a bike reduce your carbon footprint? Even taking into account the manufacturing process, the food that we eat, and the energy used to recycle, riding a bike, as opposed to driving a car, undoubtedly lowers our carbon footprint. On average, the carbon footprint of cycling is approximately 1/10 of that of driving. In a first of its kind, Trek released a sustainability report in 2021 that laid out the exact numbers of CO2e, carbon dioxide equivalent, emissions in the production of its bikes. The figures ranged from 116 kilograms to 223 kilograms CO2 emissions in a representative selection of bikes. The 223 kilograms represented the rail e-bikes. The 223 kilograms represented the rail e-bike. E-bikes add over 60 kilograms to emissions in manufacture, but in use have a lower carbon footprint because less calories are burned. Cycling saves at least 90% of CO2 emissions compared to driving. And the good news is that after you've ridden a bike for 430 miles, instead of driving those miles, you will have saved as many CO2 emissions as it took to produce the bike in the first place. This is according to Trek's sustainability report, which claims the carbon cost of manufacturing a bike can be mitigated or entirely offset when it's used to its potential. Can bicycles help fight climate change? CO2 emissions are the biggest contributor to climate change. In the UK, by 2019, greenhouse gas emissions dropped by about 40% from levels in the 1990s. During the pandemic, between 2019 and 2020, household emissions, including personal transport, fell by around 15 million tonnes of CO2e. Cycling will have contributed to this in part. The pandemic bike boom gave us a taste of what our streets could look like. But unfortunately, as the COVID-19 crisis wanes, so the environmental crisis increases. There is still a long way to go in the UK and globally before we reach the 78% reduction target of greenhouse gases by 2035. Changes in transportation, industry and lifestyle habits will be necessary in order to achieve this. It would be simplistic to say that cycling can save the planet, but it can certainly be part of the solution.